Welcome back, everyone. We get to finally talk about the Blackberry Passport and see how this specific phone holds up in 2022. Now, every time I talk about this phone, every single year since I've owned it, I think since about 2018 or 2019, so many people still love this device. People like watching these videos with the Blackberry Passport, and I find it so peculiar because on one hand, this is a company that's kind of went under, and this is a design that's a little bit unorthodox, but I definitely do think that this type of approach that BlackBerry did made this phone kind of like it's in its own league, right? It's just so interesting to see a phone like this, even though it is a little older now. It's about 8 years old. This phone came out in 2014. I think when people see a phone like this, they're just not used to it. We're used to, a slab of glass, that's all touchscreen and everything. And having a keyboard like this with a phone that isn't from the early 2000s or even late 2000s, it's from 2014. Like, it's not a super old device. It is an old phone, but it's like from the iPhone 6 era, which, kind of changes the way you may look at this phone. So in my opinion, I think the BlackBerry Passport kind of is in its own league. Now, I think it may have sold decently for a BlackBerry device, definitely when compared to, the Samsungs and the iPhones, it definitely didn't sell too well, hence why BlackBerry is probably going under now. But I will tell you, the design approaches that BlackBerry did were very interesting. I think the BlackBerry Passport was an interesting phone, and not for the better or for worse, just interesting. And I think the BlackBerry Priv, the original, sliding phone that they made, I think in 2016, 2015, something like that, that was a very, very good phone. I wish BlackBerry kept making that device. That was a very solid device. One of my favorite Android phones of all time, I think, with that, sliding approach. With the BlackBerry Passport, on the other hand, a little bit of a different story. Now on the front, you have a 4.5-inch IPS panel, and it's a 1440p panel, which is actually very interesting. Back in 2014, there weren't a lot of phones that were doing 1440p. Even the iPhone 6 Plus at the time, which was the bigger iPhone with the highest resolution of that panel at that time, was only 1080p. So 1440p is still really cool, I think, in this day and age. We also had like the Galaxy S5 that came out, and that was also 1080p as well. So this was a very interesting approach. It was a square panel, so it was literally 1440p by 1440p. A very, very interesting approach by BlackBerry there. Now you had a front-facing camera. You also had that keyboard as well. Now this was the most impressive thing that BlackBerry did at this time. They really focused in on the keyboard. Now I will tell you, personally, I like the ability of having, a customizable keyboard, and I like swipe typing. Without, by having a hardware keyboard like this, it was only a matter of time before people would probably get sick and tired of it. And what would happen if a button didn't work? What would happen if we wanted to update the keyboard? What would happen if, X, Y, and Z? Well, you can't really do that with hardware. And that's why I actually do appreciate software keys a lot more. I like having the, clicky, clacky kind of keyboard too, but it just makes a lot more sense to have software keyboards. And that's why we don't really see a lot of phones coming out with these types of keyboards anymore. So I definitely do think it's a smart approach for, as many years as it kind of happened for. But I think nowadays it really doesn't make too much sense to have a keyboard like this. But if you like it, then go for it. Now we do have a micro USB port on this thing, headphone jack as well, and a micro SD card slot as well too. So another cool type of I/O that you have on this device. And I think that's a really, really cool type of thing that BlackBerry did here. Now on the back, we do have pretty much a plastic back in its entirety. We do have the ability, I think, of popping off the top, which is really cool. But it's pretty much, like I mentioned, just a plastic built phone. You have an aluminum frame on the side of this phone too. So it doesn't necessarily feel cheap. It kind of feels like a Samsung Galaxy S21, not completely, but the sides of the phone feel very premium, but pretty much the back of the phone, with it being plastic, it doesn't really feel too premium in my opinion. So that kind of covers it up on the outside. Now we do have a camera setup on this thing too. So on the back we have a 13 megapixel lens, and on the front we have a 2 megapixel camera. Now this is what I'll tell you about the whole entire camera layout of this device. It's definitely not that bad, okay? For a 2014 device, when I think of other phones that came out at this era, this was, the iPhone 5S had just came out or something like that, right? Or it came out in 2013, and this phone came out in June, so it was pretty much, almost a year after, but the iPhone 6s weren't even out yet. So with this type of device, the camera of it, when I think of this and I think of the iPhone 5S, I would say the iPhone 5S is still a better camera, but this one isn't really too far off. It was a higher megapixel count. You had optical image stabilization, which is nice, and 1080p at 60 was pretty much the going frame rate there at that time. I definitely do think the front camera, on the other hand, definitely not its best asset. It is a very, very grainy camera that I have nowadays. Maybe back then when this phone first came out, maybe it wasn't that grainy at that time, but definitely right now, that's kind of what it is. Definitely not, deal breaker or anything by any means, but it is one of those things to keep in mind. So in terms of the camera setup, I'll definitely tell you that's kind of how I think it kind of holds up in 2022. Now, in terms of the software, I will definitely tell you this is probably my least favorite thing about this device, and I've been saying this for a few years now. With Blackberry OS, whatever they called it, I think it was definitely something that's an acquired taste. It's either you like this type of layout or you don't. Personally, I just didn't like this type of layout at all. I find it very, very strange to kind of slide between the pages. Then you get into your applications on the right side, which is cool, but I just don't even know how to use it that well. So if you're somebody who knows how to use this software and you're obsessed with like BlackBerry Mobile and that kind of like, system they have in place, then by all means, this is a pretty decent option, I'm sure, for a lot of people. But I will tell you, one of the best selling points for this type of device was that ecosystem that BlackBerry had. It pretty much was that type of device that you were getting because it was a, professional device. It was supposed to be people who were like getting things done, like for productivity and answering emails and doing client whatever. Basically, this was the phone that people were getting at that time. And I think it had its wave, it had its run. Unfortunately, it didn't last super long after that, but I definitely do think it was a very interesting device just from that approach. Now, in terms of performance, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset with 3 gigabytes of RAM. There's only ever one model of this phone with 32 gigabytes of storage. Now, again, I will definitely tell you, with this type of device, the performance, it's not bad. It's just dependent on what you consider. So again, this thing is kind of on an outdated version of Android as well. Maybe you can custom ROM it. I'm not 100% too sure. But with a device like this, it's not lasting that much longer, or if any at all. If you get a phone, this phone is 8 years old now. You can't really find many phones that are 8 years old that are still supported with software. I think the iPhone 6 may be the only one that's still supported with software, but even that one's not even that much updated anymore. So with the BlackBerry Passport, this is a device that, really depending on what you're doing, like if you're just answering emails and texting people and that kind of stuff, well then by all means, this is probably going to be good enough for the most part. But if you're somebody who's actually going through, and if you're using a BlackBerry Passport as like an everyday device for your performance needs and you're trying to play games on this and everything, a lot of the applications aren't going to work on this thing anymore because it's severely outdated. A lot of the games you can't even download on this thing anymore either. And for the most part, you're already on an outdated device with kind of outdated hardware. Now, I will tell you before I wrap up this video, the battery size of this thing was pretty big at that time, a 3,450 mAh battery. And I will definitely tell you, for this type of device, that's actually very, very interesting. That's a pretty big size battery to have on this type of device. And although, again, I don't think anybody's really trying to use this device anymore, it's still very interesting that BlackBerry put that big of a battery size on this type of device. Now, what I would definitely tell you is, I don't think the BlackBerry Passport is worth it anymore, and I think a majority of people would probably agree with that. With the BlackBerry Passport, you do have to consider that this is a device that's probably going to be outdated very, very soon, and this is a device that's probably outdated, 4 or 5 years ago. I really wouldn't recommend anybody buying it anymore, and I do think everyone's probably not buying it anymore either. And I will say on top of this as well, with the BlackBerry Passport, this is a very, very interesting device. And I do think this is kind of like a legendary phone just because of the approach that BlackBerry did at this time. It's very interesting. It very, very looks like, irregular in the phone market nowadays. But I really do appreciate BlackBerry making these types of moves and making these types of decisions because it does kind of give people what they want. If people want this type of device, well, you can go ahead and buy it. If you don't want to get this type of device, well, you have like an iPhone or something too. So I will definitely tell you this type of device, very, very interesting. I'm not probably planning on using it, but it's still a very interesting device when it comes down to it. So that kind of covers it up for the most part. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.